Hey everybody, this is Tim Barton doing a video tutorial on a piece of crap microphone. I'm going to show you how I do the details over here on the top right side where I have a light source up against the nebula wall. So let's go right into the action. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm scoping out this right hand side, and I think I need some more detail over here. This part is just a little bit too boring. So there's this dark spot, and I'm going to make it a 3D object. So right now it's just a dark blob, and I'm going to turn it into a 3D nebula. So I'm using a linear dodge layer, also linear dodge brush. The color of my brush is just this dark orange over here on the left. And I'm going to show you some of the brush settings at 30% flow. I'm adding a little bit of scattering to make it look a little bit more random, a little bit of hue, saturation, brightness, jitter. And also, most importantly, I think, is the flow jitter and the control pin pressure. So I'm using a Wacom tablet here, and the harder I press, the more paint is going to come out. If I press lightly, I'm just going to get a little bit of paint. So I'm jumping right in. I'm doing, basically, this is like a bevel. It's essentially, I'm putting light on the left-hand side of this dark mass where the light from this red giant star on the left-hand side is reflecting off. So right now, it looks very basic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the smudge tool to change it up and make this look less like a bevel and more like it's actually a nebula cloud. So I'm smudging out to the left and smudging in a little bit to the right, and then I'm going to continue the same process. And as you can see, it looks a lot more natural once I use the smudge tool on it. So this process of painting is very time consuming, but it's very enjoyable. I love painting like this. I could do this for hours, and I do. And I always end up doing it the most whenever I have a homework assignment due the next day. So as you can see here, I'm smudging out this dark spot, and I'm actually going to turn this almost monochromatic cloud into a more 3D object. So I'm pulling out the cloud, and as you can see, I'm switching layers to the blue. So I'm smudging the blue, bringing down the dark part of the cloud on the top, and I'm going to outline it with my orange brush. So reflecting the light off of the red giant on the left hand side, I'm adding in reflections on these clouds. And I could keep going at this for another hour and really turn this cloud into something extremely detailed. But it's far away from the light source, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. Objects that are close to the light source get a lot more attention. So now I've moved down to these stars that are up against the wall. So I've decided that these stars are up against the wall of the nebula. They're actually, maybe they're entombed a little bit. They're sort of in a crevice in the wall. And I'm going to show the reflections of that star's light on the nebula around it. So this is a technique that I started doing a lot in my previous piece, the Sunset Nebula, and I really enjoy having these stars that are sort of in these little holes in the nebula and the lights reflecting off the walls. It's very dramatic, and it adds a lot of detail in parts of my image that otherwise would be pretty boring. So as you can see, I'm highlighting, I'm looking for dark spots, and I'm just basically just beveling them. I'm just putting light on the side that faces the light source. Now really, I might want to use the smudge tool a little bit more, but since this area of the image is not the focal point, it's off to the side, I'm going to just stick to brushwork. So I'm adding a little bit more here, creating a little bit more of structure of this nebula, instead of having it be amorphous and quote-unquote nebulous. Okay, that's a good word. The goal is, if a 3D modeler went and took my nebula, they would be able to model my nebula from my image by looking at it and seeing what goes where, how big certain pieces are, what's close to the camera, what's far away. Continue adding more highlights and making sure that my brushwork is varied, so I'm not using straight lines, I'm using curvy lines essentially. Now I'm going to start working on this star over here, and interestingly, this star actually ends up looking like an eyeball, a glowing red eyeball. Amaret's going to love that one. I'm sure she's going to pick that one out. So that's pretty cool whenever something in your image actually ends up looking like a real object and you didn't even intend for that to happen. And one of the things in my future drawings I plan on doing is putting actual images into my paintings deliberately rather than just accidentally. Now, one of the things you may notice is that as highlights move away from the light source, they get dimmer. Now that should be obvious, but it needs to be varied. So you don't want everything to just be constantly getting dimmer. You want some bright spots too. You want some reflections that are a little bit brighter than everything else around. After I finish this, I may go back in and I may do a 1 pixel brush or a 2 pixel brush with very high opacity so that it shows up really easily, and just put in these little highlights. And these are points where the nebula is really catching the light from the light source and it's glowing quite brightly. One of the things that I think new artists do that's actually a mistake is they look at brush strokes like mine and they think that they were done with one pass. With one fell swoop, I made these brush strokes that look like they're really good. That's just not the case. It takes lots of layers, lots of passes of brush to make a really, really good looking nebula. It's okay if you use textures. It's okay if you use procedural methods. But I encourage you, on top of that, use your brush. Go in and put in that line work. These blue lights were done the exact same way, just on a different layer and a different color. In the future, I plan on doing some more in-depth tutorials that are a bit longer and do a more wide variety of details. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out my website in the video description and sign up for my newsletter. You'll get a lot more updates. Thank you so much.